Hello, I'm Rene Gutteridge, and I am talking about my book Listen today. It's been a few days since I've been able to record some of my thoughts on the book. I had a computer crash, and that took up most of last week, but I'm glad to be back and glad to continue to share my thoughts with you on my book Listen. And this is the book. It's been out for over a month now, and I've been getting some really great letters from readers, and I appreciate all the feedback. My hope is that it really changes lives, and that it changes one life at a time, and one by one we all learn to change our word habits and really think about what we say and think about the impact of our words. And so we are continuing on. We're on chapter 3. Now, chapter 3 is always it begins to be a challenging chapter. Chapter 1 and 2, those usually are pretty easy to write. You're jumping into the story. There's an eagerness that flows naturally out of the writer, and you're introducing characters, and it's kind of like the beginning of a party when you come in and you're saying hi to everybody, and there's this excitement, and then things start to slow down. And chapters 3 through around 6 or 7 can be like that. And so the challenge is to keep the reader's interest while building up conflict. And that's what you're really doing at this point, is you're setting up conflict. You may have a little bit of conflict up front, but you're doing a lot of setting up, and you're trying to pull the reader in deeper and let them get to know the characters more, because no matter what your plot and no matter what your conflict, if your reader doesn't care about the characters, then they're not going to want to go on and find out what happens. And so in this chapter, the first part, I show the relationship between Kay and Damien, their husband and wife, and I really wanted to show them interacting with Jenna, and in particular Kay and Jenna interacting. And so they have a very tense relationship, and we see how they play off of each other. They really don't enjoy each other's presence. They bicker at each other a lot, and of course Jenna's a teenager, and so it's a little bit expected, but you can see that Kay's very worried about what she wears and what she's eating and all of the things that a mother worries about. But there is a strained conflict between them, and I really wanted to set that up well, because that comes into play later in the book. And then we move to another scene where, well, at the end of that scene, we see Kay and Damien talk about Damien's wish to do something different at the newspaper. And so he's going to go in and ask his boss that morning about moving from the opinions editor to an investigative reporter at the newspaper. So I set up this scene, and this was a really fun scene to write. Edgar was a great character. I enjoyed sketching him out and figuring out who he was in relationship to Damien. And he's kind of an old school newspaper guy, and so he doesn't really understand Damien's need for some change in his life, and so he gives him a little speech about how he's done the same thing for years and years. But he agrees to let Damien be the investigative reporter for the newspaper, and that's an important setup for what happens in the rest of the book. And so what you have to do is, I needed that transition to take place, but I had to make sure that it was interesting. And so in order to make a scene like that interesting, where you don't just have talking heads back and forth, and you're not just putting information out there, you draw interesting characters and you draw interesting dynamics. And so Edgar and Damien have a little bit of a father-son sort of dynamic in their relationship, and there's a lot of bantering and fun going on in that scene. And so we set that up, and then I have a third scene in this chapter, in chapter 3, and that is showing Kay meeting Jill for the first time. Now Jill ends up becoming a vital character in the book, but at this point she's somebody that Kay really despises. And this was a interesting scene for me to write, because I wanted to show how cruel we can be with our words. And these are parents at the school who are acting very much like teenagers. And I wanted to show Kay, who on one hand really despises some of these moms for how they dress and how they try to act young, and she really just doesn't approve of them. But on the other hand, she still wants to fit in. And the common denominator that kind of makes them all connect is their dislike for this one mom named Jill. And so I had to really kind of set up how we tend to connect as human beings. And an ugly truth about us is that we often bond over other people's weaknesses. And so they all kind of gang up on this Jill and talk about her behind her back, and Kay participates in this. And so there's sort of this side of Kay that we see, and I hope that it's a side that we will be brave enough to look at ourselves and say, you know what, I'm capable of doing that. I have done that before. And I think that's the first sort of impactful scene concerning words, is that we just see that how cruel we can be just by laughing at somebody or remarking about something about them. And so that's how the chapter 3 ends, and I enjoyed writing it. It was a fun but sometimes painful progression of the story.